We're living in very uncertain times. People are talking about the market volatility, especially in the last few weeks. I imagine in most enterprises, the CFOs are freaking out because it's a little bit unpredictable in terms of how things are going. Certainly, if I were the CFO at a company, I'd probably be looking at how do I scale back our spending? How do we preserve cash just in case things really go south?
What's a
And
tariff? I don't know. Tariffs, right? That's consumed a lot of topics lately. So
100%. So in this kind of environment, in this climate of instability, and maybe the company, the strategy may not be clear. I know I've certainly worked at a lot of companies where the business was not clear on what the company strategy was. And yet you still have to operate in that environment. And so in that kind of instability or uncertainty in terms of, I don't know where the business is going, they're not able to articulate it to me. What do you do? How do you go after them?
yeah, so my day job is I'm a chief architect for a mid cap company, and I'm faced a lot of times with, well, wait, what's our strategy? We have a strategy. So whenever I find that there's lack of clarity on the strategy, my job is to make sure we communicate, we collaborate, we iterate, and then we reiterate. The number of times I'll be in a meeting and people start talking, well, stop. We have a strategy for this, right? And it's on my fingertips. I have a series of texts I can bring up whenever I have to. That's my job as the chief architect, to remind people, I don't need people inventing stuff here. We've got a strategy. Vision to strategy, execution, architecture gets us there. I can walk into any company and I can grab any person to walk by me and say, tell me what doesn't work here. And they'll quickly tell me what doesn't work here. And I can ask the same question of, how would good look like to you? Say, oh, if we had AI, my job would be so much. I can get that conversation from anybody. What I never can get is, what should we do first, and what should we do next, and what should we do third, right? I never can get that conversation. So that's my job, is to make sure not only we have the strategy, we have an execution plan that supports the strategy. Because guess what? We talk about composability and scale. And by the time I might get to the fourth step, I guarantee you that future state architecture is going to shift. The strategy is going to change. So we need to be agile and be able to pivot over to where we're going. So the job of, I think, of the chief architect in an organization is to hold that North Star, hold that vision and strategy, and make sure the execution plans are still aligned. Reiterate, collaborate, communicate, and make sure everyone knows, wait, don't invent here. We know where we're going. And if you're telling me it's changed, let's come back together, because I thought we had a strategy, because strategies are different than planned, right? I need a strategy. Let's keep my plan. If you're saying the plan's changing, whoa, is the strategy changing too? So just keep driving that iterative approach and foundation. People say, Milton, you say the same thing over and over again. I know, it's by design. It's by design. So how about you? How do you handle it? You've been in that role more than I have. So
Yeah, and it's surprising how often there is not an articulable business strategy. Now, I've certainly developed techniques to try and extract the business strategy from those stakeholders to make sure, to your point, that we have a North Star. But I've definitely also operated in places where there is no North Star, or it's going to take time to go figure it out. And yet we've got to go make investment decisions. And so I think it goes back to, again, how do we start this conversation, is recognizing that things change, right? The world is a changing place. We can't predict how the business will change. We can't predict how the technology will change, but we can predict that it'll change. When I look at the system architecture, is it designed to change? Because more often than not, it's not been designed that way. It is inflexible. There is technical debt sitting on the books. And so what I'm going to do in the absence of a business strategy is try and figure out, how do I retire the technical debt and start to infuse more flexibility in the architecture of the systems, so that when the business finally figures out its strategy, or, when things are more clear, that we're going to have a much shorter, much faster path to adapt, because we've built in some of that flexibility into the architecture and we've killed off the technical debt.
So it's funny. So I don't know if you remember this. Years ago, you and I crossed paths at the CIO conference down in New York City. I don't know if you remember this, but one of the best stories I ever heard. And I wished I could remember the CIO that told the story. But he goes, I'll walk around. This is back before COVID, when you would walk around and see people all in the office. Because if I saw a group of IT people in a meeting room, he goes, I might pop into that room and say, okay, guys, what's the business value for this meeting? What's the value of why you're meeting? If they couldn't articulate, it would typically get, oh, we're upgrading service now, or we got a patch for SQL Server, talking about how we're going to roll it out. He goes, yeah, but what's the business value? Why are you doing it? What's the business reason? They couldn't articulate that. I might break the meeting up. So it got to the point where, okay, we're going to call tech guys are calling a meeting. Okay, but what's the business value? Because so he was changing culture just by walking around, and we're not bringing tech in for the sake of tech. We're not using AI for the sake of AI. It has to be aligned to what is the business value. So that implies the organization can clearly articulate what is that business value? What is the strategy? What are we trying to achieve? So this is where it's important for leadership to be able to pound that home. And I keep the corporate values of any organization I work for in the appendix of my slides. So if I ever have to, when we start getting up there, well, guys, remember the value, we were going to be sustainable and increase profit, or whatever those values are, be a good member and help our employees. Don't go against our values. Right? Keep that state of mind. That's what the strategy is to deliver. And if there's a gap there, then let's get leadership together and close the gap. Maybe it's a communication problem. Maybe it's misalignment. But let's call it out. We have an issue. Let's fix the issue. So I like to call it out. We all know why we're doing this here, right? We're not doing tech for the sake of tech. We're doing tech to drive value.
100%. Yeah. I think there are great tools that IT can use to help get it from the business. I know somewhere on the internet, there's a article I did about something called a strategy on a page, which was something I used when I worked in the software industry to help, because that particular company was not good at that time.
Put that tool out there, the business canvas, right? Did you ever see the business canvas? It's a
No.
great tool. It puts everything. It's like a one page. Cause I've worked on a bunch of these like large innovation stage gated things, and they're so heavy with, stage gate approvals and alignment orchestration. So when this business canvas model came out, it's got a place for value and vision and memory. It's a great one, but take a look at it. Maybe we'll explore that sometime. It's a great business to execution strategy alignment. Everybody, that's what we're doing. Remember, this is the definition of everything we're doing. I think it's critical. I always say this a lot of times. We have to have absolute definitions. You know how many times someone will say, well, that's too slow, or that's too cheap, that's too expensive. I don't know what that means. I need relative data for you to tell me I'm going to spend $1 million, but I expect to get $30 million in return. That might be good. But if I spend $1 million and get 1.5 million in return, well, that's expensive. So I need data to be able to tell me an absolute definition of what our success is, how we measure. A lot of times people talk about goals and objectives. To me, a goal is I want to lose weight. An objective is I'm going to bring in 2,500 calories because I need my measurable weight. It's measurable. I can achieve it. So having everybody on the same page of what we mean and understand the definition, we're all pointing the same direction. I think that's important. So when I see there's gaps and we don't know what the strategy is, we got a communication problem to see. We're usually where I start, right? Let's get everybody communicating together. And then we'll scale up and go out and what are the other issues.